Remember, there are no shortcuts, son. Quick buck artists come and go with every bull market, but the steady players make it through the bear markets. You're a part of something here, bud.
Welcome in, everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to address a few points before we jump into the technicals. As you guys know, true value often gets lost, especially in crowded markets such as Bitcoin or crypto. It doesn't get shout. Now, the loudest voices usually aren't the smartest. This is not to offend anyone with large following. We couldn't care less. They're just noise or noisy, and sometimes pretend to be confident. However, when repeated enough, all of these actions may start to feel like truth. And this is when confirmation bias takes over. Participants stop evaluating possibilities and instead defend narratives such as supercycle, all season, and on and on and on. Now, what often gets ignored is that markets almost always communicate in advance. The data, the warnings, the structure, often visible months to years in advance. But people don't pay attention until price forces them to. Correct? By then, what was once dismissed suddenly becomes obvious in hindsight. Oftentimes, capital hindsight. Not because it was new, but because it finally aligned with reality. My friends, markets do not reward volume. And by volume, I'm referring to it doesn't matter how much following you have. I'm referring here for the largest account in the Twitter space specifically, where the noise can clutch your judgment. They reward those who listen early. The market reward to those who listen early, quietly, and without bias. Welcome in, everyone. This is Marvel 6. For those of you who are new, welcome aboard. We have been doing this for over a few years now, trying to portray unbiased perspective in the space in order to present the arguments from the research of the legends of the past. After the crash on Bitcoin, where are we now? Give me the new datasets. My friends, you guys know this was pretty much a technical proposition since July of last year. However, I also mentioned before that I invite cordially anyone, new members, old members, to go into our channel and revisit all of our previous stream. Basically, the technical proposition from this chart of July 16, 2025 is pretty much portrayed in details here, okay? For this one, is Bitcoin repeating this pattern, basically open publicly for everyone to see it. And then, of course, we have the will market stop in October, also highlighting the cycle top in October. But again, all of these are pretty much a technical proposition follow since 7 months in advance here. We went over Bitcoin, interest rate, the S&P, the XY, and so on. Then is a correction coming next also from 6 months ago. It's all detailed. This is not after the facts, as I got a comment earlier this morning. We present this way in advance as a technical proposition, and when the fact present, we then reanalyze, reassess, adjust, depending on new information. So far, the variables that we observe has been respected, okay? I also mentioned before that these levels that were Bitcoin is trading currently at these levels in the 60s and the 0.886 at 57, we went to a low of 59,800 in some exchanges, others to 60,000. So pretty well aligned with the technical proposition highlighted last year, okay? Not even last year, but even last year, my friend. I'm not sure if you were following our main projection, okay? Before all of this move from the previous high at 110 to the phase B at 74,000, we presented our technical rating. The entire technical proposition was pretty much highlighted in advance. Here, the initial idea, January 21st, 2025. From the previous highs, we were expecting a drop at least into the B point that was between 70,000 region. Clearly, that was respected. Then the adjustment we did was the bounce from the 70s into the upward move from the B to the C. That after breaking the 0.886 at 105, we reassess. Why? Because if the C leg went higher than the previous high, then the structure simply changed to, instead of a Gartley here, a cipher, which is a variation of a Gartley pattern with the C leg extended above the A point, but the technical proposition, the technical projection from the C to the D remain the same. And where do we go? We indeed tested those levels. This is not to say that we are right or wrong, but rather approaching the markets objectively. Now, within this segment of the move also, now to move, where can we go from here? We were also looking within our room a technical proposition based on the 12-hour time frame to see how these levels could potentially reach or be tested. Therefore, within this completion point, the technical proposition I was looking was within a Wyckoff schematic, okay? Within the trading range, we remain at the 80,000. The first levels also projected in August as a first range, okay? We're moving levels by levels. We then printed a labeling for potentially an accumulation. However, there are points that I'm looking specifically here on BTC that now that we're here, okay, we have indeed a range where we also executed trades. I mentioned before that analysis and execution or trading itself are two different disciplines, okay? We execute many trades, longs and shorts along the wave, but the macro view was always for this technical proposition, also in a long as of now, okay? But that doesn't matter. That's all noise. So here, how did we get to this pending point back then? Okay, the analysis we presented in December the 12th or so was that if the readings were in a range, we then may expect an upthrust into the 98. That was the ideal turning point for a short, or 103, I believe, was the technical proposition if the bounce from these lows at 86 or 80s or whatever it was then was potentially the decline afterwards. We're looking for a Gartley. We tested the Pesavento Gartley only to the 0.618 from these highs to the lows. That was 98. Since then, a decline. Other trade opportunities were presented in between 5%, 15% move, but overall, the major macro view was to test the spring action that coincidentally are we now here. Now, many of you may think this is after the fact. This is all well in advance in December for this particular proposition for the Wyckoff schematic for an accumulation range with a spring action. Did we test the spring action? As of now, we can observe that that is indeed the case so far. However, depending on new information that manifests at these levels, we'll then see if the previous trading range may be tested or recaptured. Or should I say, retest it, negate, or recapture. That will be more of a proper technical proposition. If we recapture these levels between the 70s, okay, 75 to 80 or 79,000, where there is now a CME gap between 79,000 and 81,000. If we reject, then this idea for the Wyckoff accumulation will be invalidated. However, if we start reclaiming this zone on BTC, we then can potentially speculate this to be the outcome, okay? So please, if you're watching this now, revisit later whether we reject at these highs, okay, if we are able to go to those levels, or negate, okay? So far, what we can observe is indeed a technical reaction from the proposition, from the highs to the lows also. Another Wyckoff distribution in the upper 120s. Now, are we now within the accumulation in the short-term trend? Keep in mind, we were expecting a reaction to occur at 80,000, indeed occur. However, main projection was always these major targets for 64 and 5,700 or 57,500. Okay, clearly a reaction. However, the main data point for in terms of the timing factor remains for October of this year, October as well as 2027. If you guys follow our work, you remember in 2023 we're looking for the periods of risk for 2025 and 2026. 2 years later, or now almost 3, we are here. Now again, the main point here to monitor on Bitcoin will be this schematic. If we go to those levels and higher, there is another pending roadmap that I already navigated before on my chart. Okay, try to not present all of what I see. Why? Only to preserve the research. Why? Because in this space, once the idea is presented, you may have other analysts or pseudo analysts presenting as theirs. Okay. It has been the case many times. I'm trying to reserve my own work, my own research. Also, keep in mind that trading should be treated as a business. This is not gambling, my friends. I believe that is something that needs to be removed from our mind, because that is what we see in the crypto space. The meme coins, the FOMO, the YOLOs, and so on. This is a business, okay? It was previously presented by the legends of the past. Livermore, Gartley, Gann, Wyckoff, all the bigger technicians from the past. So why will we trade differently? This, once again, is a business. So I'm going to leave you guys with this chart on Bitcoin and move into other altcoins, okay? Why? Because we have some requests. In a similar manner, now moving briefly into the XRP, also presented back in August on the stream. The same technical proposition was presented then for a short execution back then at the bearish W formation for a bad pattern with a hub level, the harmonic optimal price, meaning exceeding the previous high. However, no higher than those levels, usually the 1.13 fib extension from these legs A to B, okay? To where? Once again, the loudest in the space were projecting 20 bucks, 40 bucks, XRP to 589. We cautiously expressed our views that a decline into the 108 or 110 was potentially in the cards. Where did we go? Yesterday to 112. But Marbob, we did not hit 108. Oops, I'm sorry, my friend. I'm sorry to not capture the entire 60% decline and missing, or 70% decline, to not warn back in advance. Oops. Now, let's move back into other altcoins, because there are indeed some some altcoins that are now within my radar. Why now? Because we have reached the main projection on BTC. Remember, we're moving levels by levels. This doesn't mean that we're going to jump straight to higher levels from here, such as 200,000 as it was a narrative here at the highs. Okay, the market participants experienced a 34% decline. Then they came back and said, I told you so at these highs, only to experience another 50% decline. My friends, remember, the loudest is not always the smartest. Okay? Now moving into, let's go into one of the trending, okay? Solana. Solana also recently printed a previous low or high to the lows. The basic approach will be to project from the lows to the highs. Deepest levels of retracement, full reset, always go into the 0.886, but true value areas present often between the 0.786 and the 0.886, where those of you who have the eyes of a harmonic pattern trader can already compute potentially on the macro, okay? B point being permissive here, the B point, considering the volatility here on this token, potentially a Gartley pattern. Can we go to a deep Gartley into the 0.886? Potentially. But here, I am certainly monitoring certain assets as of now. I'd like to also mention that I presented a long previously after the last long execution on BTC, only to exit with a 5% profit on BTC. However, I also canceled the long position on Solana. Why? Because I noticed the troublesome was coming for a deeper decline, despite heading into a 24% move or 22% move from the ideal scenario. I previously mentioned I had 125 and 121, I believe, for a low area in the short-term trend, okay? Keep in mind, these are bounces. 22% is a significant bounce, but I have canceled that idea. Why? Because the chart on Bitcoin was indeed reinforcing what we were looking on the macro, okay? So now there might be arguments among other altcoins that I would like to pay attention. Why? Also, if I go here into total 2, excluding Bitcoin and Ethereum, or at least Bitcoin, if we go into the total 2, there is indeed something that is calling my attention. An M formation. Previously, a test into April 2025 as type 1 reactive move. Could this be now the type 2 return? At least a relief rally among some altcoins after such a massacre. Everyone, we're now trading at 70,000. The spring action creating indeed some reactive move. Okay, reactive move. Nearly, let's see, from 60,000 to current levels, that is nearly 17%. Basically a $10,000 move on Bitcoin. If you have any requests, such as other tokens on the altcoins, you guys can always comment, leave a comment, or at least within the comment section, I can go take a look and present into the next stream. I wanted to go over Solana, XRP, and the total 2 that is presenting indeed some readings. However, if I zoom in, okay, zoom out in this case, looking left, market leaf clues, there can be something larger of a bigger magnitude if the selling pressure continues later on. 2026 will be an interesting year for sure. However, it will be a year that everyone should filter out the noise and start paying attention to what truly matters. There are some technicians out there that has been doing an amazing job. Kudos to them, as well as other large figures in the space presenting their approach. Kudos to them. Okay? But the majority, my friends, filter the noise, and I'll see you guys on the next one. And remember to live a life with an attitude of gratitude. Do not forget to leave your comments. I can go over them and analyze on the next stream. I'll see you guys on the next one. And remember to live a life with an attitude of gratitude. Cheers.